And there's a transition happening within organisations, and for organisations that we're working with, it's one of the most substantial cultural transformations and changes happen within organisations for many, many years within those companies. And it's bringing about some of the most substantial changes in the way that people interact, they connect, and the way that they react to each other into difficult situations at work. And as we'll hear from the case studies, some of the changes that are being made in the way people work together are substantial and extremely dramatic. Now, we know that the Gibbons review and the Gibbons agenda, we'll talk about that naturally today, might make mediation more of a compliance issue, and perhaps the move towards using mediation will be because you'll be required to do so. So TCM is looking to increase the number of organisations that we're working with, and that we have a target now of bringing mediation within 93 organisations.
It is worth checking, because you do need to have someone who has the capacity to empathise. It's really important.
It's important to have a selection process, not only to select the right mediators, but also to send out a message that as a scheme you're setting in place quality from the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think that sends out, it doesn't just get the right people in, it also sends out a message that it's not something you can just walk into to be a mediator. There's a gatekeeping process, so I think it's useful for that exercise as well.
The point at which I joined, the university was just also at the stage of rewriting parts of its charter, which involved rewriting the grievance, disciplinary capability procedures, etc. And that gave an ideal opportunity, really, to build mediation into those procedures, not as a compulsory stage, but as an optional stage. We're now in a stage where we're reviewing, we used to have what we called a harassment procedure, we're now creating a dignity at work policy. And again, we're trying to build mediation in to make people aware all the time that it's available as an option to them. I think there's a degree of buy-in, but what we're trying to do is say, well, it's not enough to say, yes, lovely, great idea, get on with it. A, we need a level of resources, not a huge amount of resources, but B, we need you, senior management, to keep thinking about this, because you're the ones who see the disputes at the end. Once they've escalated to a certain level, you're the ones tearing your hair out and saying, oh, this is ridiculous, this is taking up so much management time, this is costing me so much money. They need a way to put their money where their mouths. Is that the right expression? Yes. Yeah. And to say, well, there is another way, and at that level, we need to be encouraging everyone across the organisation to use mediation. So I think we're still out there, but that's the message we're trying to sell.
I think if there's an economic downturn, as it's likely to be, it will have a greater influence on the use of mediation than the Gibbons review. And I think it will have a greater impact of mediation than a compliance issue from government. I think organisations, it's been very easy to abrogate responsibility for the resolution of conflict to another greater power, be a judge or lawyers or internally within a determination process. And it's failed to bring resolution in the vast swathe of cases. And I think now recognition that we can't just throw money at it to make it go away. We're having to tighten up. It's going to force organisations to be far, far more creative in the way they resolve disputes. And I think that, for me, looking at the potential for mediation, the potential is very substantial now, because organisations, quite rightly, will be asking questions. Do we want to be paying lawyers tens of thousands of pounds to bring this case to a sort of kind of temporary fix? And I don't think it's good value for money. It's a bit of a nerve-wracking process, and having another mediator by your side, it encourages you to do a number of things. One is to plan. And I'm not saying that any mediator would jump in the lift thinking, I've got the mediation to do, without having thought about it in advance. But if you have another mediator by your side, it does mean you're likely to pick up the phone a day or two before and talk it through. That's good practice. I think being there and sharing the experience and being able to work through in those little moments, how are you feeling, how do you think we can deal with this situation, certainly for a newly qualified mediator is invaluable. And the third reason that we use co-mediation and really encourage it within organisations is the kind of reflective practice that we've started to hear coming out. I don't know about yourselves, but after a mediation, a nice glass of wine or juice, wine in my case, I might be honest, wine in my case, and sitting down afterward, or a bottle. But you can have a glass of wine on your own, but a bottle of wine is a bit more questionable. So being a co-mediator, you can have a bottle rather than a glass. But but the reason I say that is there's a certain seriousness to that, which is actually debriefing afterwards, reflecting on your practice, reflecting on those little sticking points and learning from those. It just builds, I mean, the idea of then having a repository of this learning within the business, I'd not heard of that, I thought was a fantastic idea. And so contributing to that. So we do encourage it, but we don't say you have to. I mediate on my own a lot, and sometimes getting one mediator into a case in a short period of time, it just makes sense. One final point, multiple party mediations and harassment and discrimination mediations, always two mediators. You can't mediate a multiple party dispute on your own. I've been there and tried, and it's not feasible.
Yeah, I mean, when we first had the service, before it was a pool, there was two of us doing it, and we mediated on our own. And I couldn't get my head round how two mediators could work until I went on the training course, and I was thinking everyone's going to be talking over each other, one's going to be dominating. I can't see how it would work, but surprisingly, it does work very, very well. Those issues don't surface, and so and they do work. It's really great to have a partner to work with, because each person tends to bring something to the mediation that moves it forward. So it's quite good, you know.
And I know organisations, after a period of time, then will allocate a solo mediator to work in a case. There's not a hard and fast rule, but certainly for those first three cases, certainly a minimum, I would say, like the co-mediating. But if we can, then it's good. Managers are managing performance all the time, and obviously we're talking about a formal process, but I would be saying to a manager outside of the process, you're always managing performance, you're always managing capability, you're always skilling and setting targets and identifying resources and developing your staff. So it seems interesting that there's a negative element, a negative association with the term performance management, because it's a commonplace management tool. And I think what it often does is it represents as these words, these short words, bullying and harassment, performance management, capability, grievance, they're very short words which have very powerful meaning and associations for the individuals concerned. I think what mediation does in a very nice and kind of a very supportive way is we get beneath the term. What do you mean by performance management? What are your concerns? What are your needs? How have they been communicated to the employee? How did you get feedback from the employee? How did you manage to build that into a framework where you're able to support and manage that individual going forward? And then from that, how did you set goals and targets? I think mediation can deconstruct the term performance management, grievance, bullying, harassment, all of these policies, because they are just, in many respects, words which people hear them and it almost feels like they're blows to the body blows. But actually when you ask those parties, what do you actually really mean and understand by those words, they don't understand them, they just see them as an attack. And the best form of attack, the best form of defence is a counter-attack. So the words themselves develop this cycle of conflict, so we just can help the parties, the managers, the staff to come out of that cycle and just reflect. And I think I'd absolutely agree with Mary, it has to be done on the basis that both parties recognise there's a need for that, and some managers will and others won't, and that's got to be their right and their privilege ultimately. What I was hoping to do today was to be able to tell people about what we are now as an organisation, what achievements we've had over the last 7 or 8 years since I set the company up, and really showcase some of the successes and the team that makes up what TCM is. So really letting people know and to share the benefits of mediation, of course, within organisations, and ultimately bringing people in from other organisations, some of the case studies, helping people to see what mediation can do within organisations just like their own, where they can set up mediation services and begin to make full use of mediation across their organisations. So I used to walk into presentations and start off by saying you're about to be introduced to the UK's best kept secret. I don't think it's the UK's best kept secret anymore, I think it's out of the bag. I still think there's a lot of work to be done to make mediation acceptable and credible to people within organisations, but we're doing that, and today has evidenced that from the calibre of organisations and the people that have been here. So I think it is going to become a very substantial part of how organisations manage difficult situations. I'd like to think that we're innovating, and I'd like to think that we're working with organisations, bringing them with us and sharing our idea and visions about what a mediation can work. So I'd like to see us at the forefront of the developments of mediation here in the UK and further afield, as we're already starting to say.